Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about the state of true solo in Chapter 2 of Arkham Horror, the card game. If you don't know, we're talking about true solo, we mean playing one player, one investigator. Kind of what it says on the box. Other people sometimes recommend playing what's called two-handed solo, where you are just one player, but you are controlling two different investigators. This is not like an officially supported format. There's nothing in the rules that says you can or should do this, but is a popular way for people to play because they want to get some variety with different investigators and not be locked into playing just one player. However, some people also say that the reason to do this is because the game isn't designed for true solo. I'm actually kind of ticked off when people say things like that because I understand why that sometimes in the past this game has done not a great job of balancing for player count, and sometimes it feels like playing one investigator has been a bit harder to do, but the game supports it. It says so on the box. And I think that the designers for Chapter 2 have done a really good job of changing how the scenarios play, and the investigators themselves, I think, are very strong in solo, and the player cards too. So what I want to do for the rest of this video is talk to you a bit about that. Some suggestions for playing solo and for including particular cards that are maybe better in solo than they are otherwise, even if they are pretty good in general. So this is just focusing on Chapter 2. And yeah, let's kind of get into it because, yeah, like I said, I just don't appreciate when people come on to forums and say things like, yeah, I need some help playing solo. And then people just respond and say, don't play two-handed. I think the designers have added some more text to cards to help lower player counts. Check out these two locations from the first two scenarios of Brethren of Ash. This is the new core set campaign that have this free move ability. During your turn, if there are exactly one or two investigators in the game, move to connecting location once per round. This is like kind of fantastic, right? You're often stressed for move actions in this game. And I'm surprised we never saw anything quite like this in Chapter 1. There are a few locations here and there that say things like if there's exactly one or two investigators, do something, but it's very, very rare. I think we got this in Feast of Hemlock Vale in the Preludes in particular, which they must have play tested the hell out of and found that it was hard to get around the map. These maps in the first and second scenarios are kind of similar, and having this free move is pretty great. By the way, kind of funny, I just noticed that there's the group limit once per round on the Miskatonic Quad, but not on the Merchant District. That's limit once per round. So basically, that means that each investigator can take that move ability, that move effect, in Scenario 2, but in Scenario 1, it's only one of the investigators who gets that free move. Interesting. All right, let's get into some things that I know about for scaling. What scales well in true solo? And one thing that jumps out, I think, very strongly is the number of clues on locations is low. So when I talk about what scales, I'm mostly thinking about what literally says on the card the number of clues per investigator. That per investigator symbol is quite important. It means that you don't have to do as much in solo. And it feels weird to say that, but not everything scales that way. Clues certainly do. Most locations only have a single clue. We're going to see a bit later a list of cards that just get one clue at a time. Those cards feel way better in a true solo deck because that punch that they have, the thing that they do that might be kind of underpowered in a larger player count, does the job well. And as we'll see, many of those cards are fast or tack on something else. Getting one clue with a card actually is quite good. And in higher player counts, you feel like that's just not enough and you need a beefier card, more expensive card. It's okay to run the cheap, maybe not as punchy cards in solo, just because there are fewer clues. Sometimes you'll get a location with 2 clues. Sometimes you'll get a location with 3, but that's extremely rare. It's mostly going to be 1, and sometimes it's going to be 2. In which case, sometimes card effects that get 2 clues at a time at a single location are good too, but you really want to err on the side of, I want to get the single clue off a location as much as possible. Now, there's other things. The number of encounter cards, that's something that scales just as much. I've talked about this in my videos on True Solo before. And what I mean by this is that you don't actually get swarmed by enemies that much. You don't get swarmed by annoying treacheries that attach to locations all across the board. And it really means you're only dealing with one threat at a time, which makes the game Let me tell you, a lot easier. Of course, you can get a bad series of encounter cards and kind of snowball. If you draw an enemy turn one, you couldn't get rid of it, and then you draw another one, you couldn't get rid of it, and now you're just kind of in this holding pattern until you can get yourself out of that jam. But things don't escalate quite as fast. If you get an encounter card that doesn't take any actions to deal with, then it's really free. Sometimes in 2-player, 3-player, 4-player, but even just in 2, you are there as the clue getter or as the fighter, and you might need to solve problems for both investigators at the same time. You might have to think about how the game state has changed quite a bit because everyone drew a treachery, and now there's all kinds of things attached here and there and everywhere. In solo, just one thing at a time. Just one thing. Also makes cards like War Protection, I think, quite strong too. Not on my list for later, but I do think that it can alleviate an entire round, and then suddenly you have your full turn of 3, maybe more actions to clean up whatever you need to do from previous rounds or make a lot of progress towards the act deck. Advancing the act deck, of course, is what you want to do anyway, and sometimes you'll find in solo that things go quite quickly. The health of boss enemies also tends to scale. The health number right in the middle of the card tends to have a player count symbol next to it, but not always. It's sometimes complicated here where in solo you actually get taxed negatively because they might say something like the health of the boss is 5, and then text on the card itself says plus another 5 per player. And that scales actually harder against the solo player because you're dealing with the scaling part plus a flat amount as well. But not all bosses are like that. Sometimes they're just a flat 5 per player or something. And dealing damage of that amount is actually not so hard. Even if you have like a boss that has 5, maybe even 4, or whatever it might be per player, you can find player cards that just deal with that in one action. Whereas a larger group of players, maybe it takes you several rounds to get rid of a boss. I've found that in solo, you can usually take out a boss in 1 or 2 rounds if you're holding back cards that are going to deal a large amount of damage for just that situation. Much easier to do, and then you don't have to worry about things like how do I survive, doing an evade, treacheries that make the location even harder later. Bosses tend to be a bit easier. And it's okay in solo for some things to be easier and some things to be harder. Clearly, we're going to go over a list of things that are harder in a second, but clearly not everything is going to be equal. And the kinds of decks that you build are going to be slightly different too, although I would argue not hugely different. Scenario objectives, those tend to be scaling in your favor too. So sometimes you have to do something like parlay an enemy player count times. And if you're just doing this in solo, doing it once is pretty easy. Repeating that for multiple players can be kind of hard. And you might say, well, that shouldn't matter. It's 1 per player, so each of the players can do this. But the reality is that many of these kinds of objectives are good for one particular investigator, one particular player who says, hey, I have the really high willpower, I can do that test. And now suddenly they're doing that test 4 times instead of 1. In true solo, you play such that you can kind of tackle everything. You're not great at everything, but you can probably make it work once. So the willpower test, you don't want to do 3 times. You can do it once, though you've got a skill card to throw at it. That's not so bad. I gave the example of smoke and mirrors because the parlaying is very, very common in that scenario to do multiple times per investigator. But in solo, this is also tends to happen in other campaigns where it's like spawn a certain number of things and then you do the objective based on those things. So yeah, it's not something that is just for, say, the parlays. Okay, now what doesn't scale? Number of locations is the big one, right? And this is why the free move on those locations I showed you a few minutes ago is so good. What happens in larger player counts is you can split up a bit. You have a map of, say, like, I don't know, 8 locations. You might be able to spend a couple of rounds just going to one side of the map and dealing with whatever problems are there with a group of 1 or 2 investigators, whereas the other investigators can go to the other side of the map and just spend a few rounds doing whatever needs to be done there, and then you're kind of done. What happens in lower player counts is you spend actions moving somewhere and then moving back. So dealing with these problems is basically giving you attacks of a few actions every time on top of whatever you need to do there. And if you don't have to get a clue from every location because someone else is doing that, you're saving yourself tons of actions and movement exploring or just moving back and forth. So, number of locations doesn't scale. Occasionally it does. There are a few scenarios in the past where it just says something like put X number of locations into play according to the player count, but this is very, very rare. So it's important to have some extra movement or have it built into the scenario, like we saw in those two scenarios in the core set. Health of most enemies doesn't scale. So bosses aside, the enemies you draw from the encounter deck, they might have 2 health or 3 health, sometimes 5 or 6. That doesn't change. So if you are a true solo investigator and you draw a big enemy, well, you have to deal with that enemy in just the same way that a larger player count group has to as well. And that means that your damage output on your weapons or spells or whatever it might be needs to output a lot of damage. Now, the good thing is you don't get as many of these enemies, so the kind of I guess the amount of charges or ammo that you need to spend isn't going to be quite as high, which makes things I think fine. But you have the problem of the turn, right? That you need to deal with the enemy before it attacks you at the end of your 3 actions. In a larger player count, you can probably find some solutions to deal damage to multiple enemies. You can engage off of other people. You can probably find some ways of making the turn not that big of a deal. You're instead of dealing maybe 12 actions instead of 3, dealing with a few enemies on the board. So this means to me that you have to save your actions with dealing with enemies because they are not scaling very much at all. To that end, the player card effects don't scale, right? So if a card says deal 2 damage to an enemy, it deals 2 damage to an enemy. And that means it's better for those boss fights, but it's also going to be just as good or maybe just as important for dealing with the small enemies too. They have essentially the same effect. Now, this is true for the clue cards too. If you have a card that says discover 1 clue, well, it's much better in solo where discovering 1 clue does a lot. Kind of mentioned this before. But the reverse is also true. Discover 3 clues or discover clues per point you succeed by. Those cards start to be kind of, well, bad. They're just overcosted for what you want to do in solo, and it's okay. You don't have to take those in solo. They're good in 4-player. Number of lead enemies. This doesn't scale either. It's basically the boss question I brought up before. You have to deal with them. Whenever a story beat happens, an act or agenda flip spawns an enemy, it's usually, but not always, but almost always going to be just a flat number. They might not have as much health, but the fact that you have to evade them potentially, that's a flat thing too. In true solo, evasion is very good, I think, but in larger player counts, it's better because if there's a big boss, only one person has to take a single evade action, assuming they're successful, and then you're done with that enemy. In solo, one of your 3 actions might have to be used for evasion, and now you don't have as much of a turn left before it readies again next round. So be aware of something like that. Lastly, drawing through your deck also doesn't scale. And that maybe sounds kind of strange, but what I mean is that the speed in which you get through your deck, play your cards, that doesn't really change by player count. So if you're playing a slow deck, one that says, I'm going to pop off after, 5 rounds of playing all my assets and drawing all the important cards, you're going to be at a bigger loss in solo because the game is not waiting around for you. It doesn't in 2 or 3 player either, but there's maybe a different player who can cover for you when this happens. So because your card effects, like, I don't know, draw 2 cards or something from a player card doesn't change by player count, you have to put a lot of your time and effort through finding your stuff. And hopefully that means not needing to spend a lot of time playing your cards, drawing, getting resources. All that stuff is just going to slow you down. It's necessary. It's necessary in a card game, but you don't want to play in a way in true solo where it's going to take a long time for you to be productive. All right. So here are some general recommendations based on all of that. 1, single clue discovery is good. Mentioned it already, but you should definitely have cards in your deck that say discover 1 clue. And that's not the same thing as investigate for a single clue, although I think that's good too, but I like the testless clue. It allows you to bypass particular treacheries or location effects that keep you from getting clues through investigations. And just picking up the clue is very strong without having to take a test. I'm not going to say that in solo taking tests is bad, but there is some amount of volatility there. You could say that the scaling, I guess, is also kind of anti-test taking because a single auto fail might throw everything off, whereas in a four-player game, it's less likely to be a big deal because there are so many more actions at stake. I probably also should have mentioned that treachery effects that say something like place one doom on the current agenda aren't as big of a deal in true solo because it's not taking away as many actions. So I should have mentioned that before, but this is a good time to mention it. Next, I think that saving actions with enemy management, whether that's evasion or dealing damage, is really important, meaning that if you can get an extra action to evade, like your name is Trish Scarborough, or maybe you're dealing extra damage on your attacks, maybe you're just finding other ways to move around the board with some cards that we'll look at in a second. That stuff is going to be very useful because these things don't scale by player count. You do need to put more action compression into enemy management and to movement, whereas you don't need to do so with the investigations as much. Although it can be useful, I like the cards that just get a clue. Basic Investigate's still very good too. I would run lighter on play actions if you can. This is going back to the how fast is your deck to set up. If you can save on play actions because your cards are fast, or maybe you're Dexter Drake and you get extra plays essentially, or other cards are in your deck that help you get some more extra play actions. Because assets are important. I'm not going to say that you should be not playing assets at all and just running all events or skills, but you should think carefully about how many actions those are actually taking up. Events can be fast, assets can be fast. There are ways to save yourself a bit on this. All right, now let's talk about some cards in particular. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because these are just overall lessons and not particular cards that are the end all and be all of the lesson. They're just examples of them. So the first one I think is a good example of this. The skill cards are good. The basic skill cards from the core set are fantastic in solo. Why? Because you need to do everything. You need to pass all kinds of tests. I'm not going to say that the best thing to do is to include all of the different basic skills. Unexpected Courage is good because it covers any particular skill, and +2 is good, but you probably, of the manual dexterity, guts, overpower perceptions of the world, I guess those are the ones, you should probably pick two. Pick two of your favorite skills, and that should be based on your stat line. For someone like Daniela, who's got a 5 combat, she's going to probably pick up 2 overpowers to help her make sure she passes those tests, but also draw through her deck a little bit more quickly. And then after that, it's tough because her willpower is 3, her agility is 2, and so is her intellect. Those are not great numbers to try to invest into these cards. You probably run with guts because the encounter deck makes you test that a lot, and 3 is at least better than the other 2s. But I like manual dexterity a lot for evasions, and I like it a lot for different treacheries that are going to be certainly part of chapter 2 much more than they were overall in chapter 1. So I think she's tricky. Most of the other investigators you can easily pick 2. Some of them you might go with even more, but I think you should pick 2 and then seriously consider Unexpected Courage to cover other stuff too. You have to, I'm not going to say you need to pass every single test that you get. I think that's a mistake in solo, but you should at least be able to put something into a few different types of tests and not just specialize in one. Now, cards for getting single clues. Will of the Cosmos is an insane card. Place 1 doom on a player card you control. Then discover 1 clue at your location and 1 clue at another revealed location. Doesn't have to be connecting, just any revealed location out there. Now, this means that you can go somewhere, see that there's a high shroud, and say, you know what? I'll get it later. You never have to move back, and you can just go get a clue somewhere else and then pick up the one you left behind later on in the scenario. That doesn't always work. Sometimes you need to be at a location and have it be empty of clues to advance or take some action on that location. So this isn't perfect, but it is a very, very strong card, I think, in any player count. but especially in single player because there's only going to be one clue on the location to begin with. So you're essentially solving that location, maybe two locations really, with this one card. Now, place one Doom on a player card you control. First off, as I said a few minutes ago, the Doom isn't that big of a deal. If you lose a round, but you made so much progress with this card, oh well. It's the price of doing business. You're just trying to finish the scenario. Sometimes you take a few cracks at maybe the Doom won't matter. But the reality is, in most decks, you are going to play this in a circumstance when the Doom doesn't matter. Either it's the turn before the agenda would have advanced anyway, kind of the witching hour effect, where the Doom essentially doesn't make the agenda advance any quicker because you only check to advance the agenda at the beginning of the round. Or you can make the player card that you place this on leave play. Lots of things you can do here with Dexter Drake in particular. You can put the Doom on a player card, and then you play some other asset, and then you're going to return that player card that with the Doom on it to your hand. When the card leaves play, the Doom leaves play too. Just throw it back into the bin. It doesn't count towards the agenda anymore. So I would say in 95% of the cases, you are going to get rid of the Doom before it actually counts against you. So very, very strong card. Working a hunch, this is the secret card that just for no questions asked gets you a clue at your location. It is fast, so it's saving you on actions anyway. The 2 resources is an ask, but for solo, fine. Just get the clue. Clue's good. There are other cards that are kind of similar to this. I think Working Hunch is your baseline. Pay Your Dues in Rogue. This one does 2 things at once. This one is getting you the clue without taking a test, but also you're parlaying and disengaging in particular enemy from the investigator. There's no test here, right? So it's similar to what we just saw with the previous 2 cards. It's just going to cost you some money. It might be a good way to deal with enemies where you can leave them behind, right? You might not worry about them catching up. I know that a lot of enemies have Hunter, so sometimes people say, well, is this really solving the enemy when you evaded, or in this case, having it disengage and gain aloof? I think the answer still is yes in many cases, because solo is a rush. You are trying to end the scenario before you die, and usually you're not going to get the enemy pile up, so it's fine to take the shortcut of getting rid of an enemy by cheating a bit, like with this card. Getting your clue with the same card is a nice bit of compression. So while this isn't fast, it's basically saving you a couple of actions anyway. Kind of depends on how much money you want to spend on this. I wouldn't spend more than 3, 4 maybe, but 3 seems like the top end for it to be really worth your time. But sometimes you don't have a choice. You're like, this is the way I win. Just do it. Lesson learned, this is for Daniela. Play after an enemy attacks you, discover a clue. This is cheaper than working a hunch at 1 resource, but you do need to time it a bit. I think for Daniela, it's tougher because the number of enemies out there in solo is not as good, but you might find those boss enemies do spawn at predictable times, so you can line things up that way. Okay, a couple more cards that do take tests, but I still think they're good. Thieves' Kit is a core set card where you're investigating using either intellect or agility. Use your icons. I think your skill cards in hand are fantastic to just get rid of as soon as you can to draw through your deck, to make sure you pass tests. I think every single test, every single action matters so much more in solo. The fact that you get to compress the investigate with a gain resource, I think is really good. This is especially better for any investigator who has a higher agility than intellect. While Trish, I think, can make use of this, this is good for, say, Dexter, Andre. Who else do we have can take this? I guess that's it for now. But the card is quite good. You also has item synergy. There's a few other cards that care about items, but I think on the baseline of putting together the resource generation and the clue discovery, it'll help you play your cards just that much more quickly, even if this costs 3 to begin with. Autopsy Report. This is an experience card coming in the Carolyn Fern deck that compresses, I think, the fighting actions with the investigate actions in solo. So after an enemy at your location is defeated, you exhaust this to investigate, getting plus X for your investigation, the skill value, where it's the defeated enemy's printed health. I mean, sometimes it's going to be just +1, and you say, sure, I will take a free investigate action at my location to just get a clue. And now you're kind of playing like you have maybe 4 actions per turn. This seems really good in Joe Diamond. I still think that you could probably do well with this in Carolyn Fern. Even though she's not going to be defeating too many enemies, she has ways, and this refunds her essentially actions. In solo, it can be kind of bad to spend your whole turn dealing with an enemy, but now you get a free action out of it. Pretty good. Now we get into some movement tech. Olivier Bishop. Wow. This guy is incredible. I think he's the best one that we've seen printed at level 0 in quite some time. For solo, maybe even more so, but I mean, there's some good stuff, and they've printed some crazy good allies. We'll see another one in a second, but he gives you this free move, which can only be during your turn, fine, but you don't have to be any other restrictions. You could be engaged with an enemy. You can take an enemy with you into some other location and leave them there after you do an evade, because he gives you +1 to do some evasions, among other things that agility is useful for. Card is really good. And Loner in the Miguel de la Cruz deck is pretty similar, not taking up a slot. I do think that in solo, the empty location rider here, that you can only move to an empty connecting location. Empty locations are no investigators, no enemies. This is very likely to be the case in solo because there aren't any other investigators. So this is just that much better. I still think it's very good in other player counts, as Olivier is too. But wow, if you're playing, I don't know, Olivier in Andre Patel and you have like kind of the equivalent of 5 action turns, geez, you can make a lot of progress. Like I said, this game is a lot about making progress towards the end of the game and not dying in the process. Shadow Meld is your evade spell in Mystic, and this one lets you spend a charge if you want to move to a connecting location. 4 times is a lot. 4 moves in a solo game is pretty good, especially since the enemies aren't likely to be around that much that you're going to spend them all. But I haven't tried this card yet, but it is very reminiscent of the old Mists of Relia. It was an evade spell from the Forgotten Age. I think this one's just kind of better since you don't have to spend the charge, but it's going to see play. This is going to see play when you know you need to do some evasions. Still, the damage spells are better in solo. Local map, this one also gives you some free movement in solo. The only problem with this one, and it's kind of a foil for the other 3 movement cards we just saw, is that you have to use this to move to, or even investigate, revealed connecting locations. That's hard to do in solo, right? If you're going to reveal locations, usually you just finish them off and then leave. Not always, right? You can, in fact, we just saw some reasons to leave locations, like with Will of the Cosmos. You can still investigate those locations. I just don't think you want to necessarily move back to them. So there are a couple circumstances I can think of, especially in that final scenario of the core set, where this does probably do something for you. But free moves are free moves, so I'm not going to poo-poo this card too much. All right, how about damage dealing? Machete, classic. All right, this is a little bit updated for Chapter 2. Fight, you get +1 combat for the attack if the attacked enemy is the only enemy engaged with you. You may exhaust Machete to deal +1 damage for this attack. This is on success. You'd make that choice to exhaust. In True Solo, you're most likely going to be only engaged with one enemy. Sometimes not, but as a baseline, it's going to be effective. And if there's a 2 health enemy, this is just taking you 1 action. There's a 3 health enemy, takes you 2 actions to deal with. Pretty good. It's only when you get to 4 and 5 health enemies that this is going to be a bit slow, but that's all right. Cosmic Flame is the spell for Mystics to deal damage. This is a nice reworking of older spells because you only spend that charge if you want to deal the extra damage. One of the problems in Chapter 1 with Mystics was how do they fight using their willpower without using the spells? Because spells say, please make everything willpower, and then suddenly you get to a 1 health enemy and you don't really want to spend your charge that does 2 damage and waste it on that 1 health enemy, or the 3rd point of health on a 3 health enemy, the 3rd point of damage there. So this card lets you get around that by only spending charges when you want to do the 2 damage. Otherwise, you can just do 1 damage as much as you want. Now, while this card is good, the real fantastic card for solo and honestly for every player account is the upgraded version. This is 5 XP, so it is a lot, honestly. But it does so much. Now we're dealing 2 damage every single time we fight. Whew. Those bosses are going to go down so much more quickly. Now, we also can spend a charge to do a 3rd point of damage to that enemy or 1 damage to any other enemy, which is crazy. Now I can get rid of our whippoorwills. We can get rid of just another enemy that's engaged with us. It's so good. This will chew through enemies so quickly, especially with other things that we've seen from these powerful investigators in Chapter 2 already to maybe refill this or put it back in our hand. This is going to do very well in solo, even if you play it on turn 1, because you're not spending all 4 of those charges right away. So, great card, makes dealing with enemies so much easier than anything I think we ever saw in Chapter 1 outside of, like, I don't know, Runic Axe or Cyclopean Hammer or something like that. Next, we have a few more ways of dealing damage or thinking about dealing damage. Daniel Jameson is the other ally I alluded to earlier as being just really good. And the reason why is not the +1 evasion, which is great, but after you fail an attack or evasion, you get to attempt the skill test again at +1 skill value. This is amazing value because you don't have to put everything into your test. You can just sort of lie back and wait and see if you're going to pass. And if you don't, try again. Your actions are so precious, especially dealing with enemies. Kind of harp on this again, but the enemy, if it doesn't die at the end of your turn, it's attacking you. You don't want that to happen. In 2-player and 3-player, if you fail, you get a little bit of backup. Well, here's your backup. It's Daniel Jameson. Polished Cane is also, I think, in a similar boat. This is a weapon that doesn't do any extra damage, so that kind of makes it bad. But if it exhausts an enemy, automatically evading it, that seems like you're solving the problem the enemy presented for the most part. It allows you to spend the rest of your turn going back to what you want to do to begin with. Maybe getting clues, maybe taking some action on the location, and you can punt the enemy to the next, round if you didn't kill it outright. But I don't know. I mean, the card is just very good for what it does, which is help you get an enemy off of you. Eventually, you need to kill it, probably. But honestly, this doesn't even exhaust until you want it to be evaded. So unlike lockpicks, which good card in solo, it exhausts right away, and you can't try again if you fail. This you can just keep poking away at an enemy, and it might die after 3 actions, and that's probably fine too. Last couple cards I want to talk about are economy cards that I think are just extremely productive in Chapter 2 in solo. Gather Intel. This card is a fast card. Remember how I said that fast cards are really good in solo? It's just good anyways. But you play when an enemy enters your location. Doesn't happen a lot in solo, but when it does, getting a free couple of cards for 1 resource seems quite good. I'm happy to leave this in my hand until I see an enemy, and then you just play it. Compare this to like some of the big card draw that you get in Chapter 1, like Thorough Inquiry, that asks you to spend 2 resources and 2 actions, and then you get to share cards, but it's up to, 5 total? I mean, that's a lot of cards, but in solo, you don't need that many. Just the 2 cards for cheap, fast, it's very good. Offering Bowl, giving you a bunch of resources, is also good on the economy side. I mean, the economy stuff is great in Chapter 2, especially for Mystic. 3 offerings, so we're taking 3 damage and gaining 6 resources over a couple of rounds here, 3 rounds. The fact that this only costs you 1 and 1 action, and eventually you get some burst economy, I think is really good. You need to be able to play your spells in Mystic, you need to be able to play your allies. Taking a damage is fine. I, in solo, am okay with taking a bunch of damage in a horror if I know it means I'm getting through the scenario pretty quickly. So this kind of burst economy is useful. Again, lots of other synergy with Marie Lambeau and her damage abilities. I mean, she's crazy good with economy. I mean, her damage gets her cards too. But even in someone like Dexter for being able to discard this or put it back in his hand, all kinds of stuff he can do that is tricksy with Offering Bolt. Last couple cards. Endurance and Level Headed. These are economy cards on the other end where we're spending our money. These cards are probably the best value you get. I do think that Sharp Rhetoric is decent also, and Sharp Tongue is fine. I think if you are doing lots of evasions, it's worth your slots if you're using sticky fingers or something else too. But these two cards, I think, are the most important effects you can get in solo. I think you can solve the clue problem with other cards. I think you can solve the spells stuff with other cards like the spells themselves or Bloodstone. But Endurance and Level Headed, getting you the enemy stuff from the encounter deck and the treachery stuff also from the encounter deck, as well as things that spawn on their own, is very, very powerful. It's not cheap to put into play. 2 resources for these, but spending 1 resource to get +2 for an attack or an evasion, very good. Spending 1 resource for +2 on some kind of scenario card, whether that's making progress through a parlay, getting rid of a fire treachery, getting rid of an arcane lock, all that stuff is important to just make sure you hit the thresholds. And by thresholds, I mean on the chaos bag. So if you have, I don't know, you're up by 2, but really you need to be up by 4 to beat the chaos bag, play these the cards, put 1 resource into it, and then you'll be good. They're just very powerful. I think the starting versions are good too, but the fact that these are at level 0 means that you can put them into multiple decks. Okay, that's it for me for today. I hope you enjoyed and maybe had some of your gears turning towards for your next true solo run. I do think this method of playing, this modality, if you will, is extremely playable. I've played through the core set a few times now solo, and it is very, very playable. Sometimes it's actually a lot easier than in higher player counts. I know I have a lot of experience in the game, but the amount of cards we have with just the core set cards as well as the evergreen starter decks, we have enough where solo works and it's fun. All right. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.